Good morning to one and all. Today we shall deal with one of the important aspects in respiration, that is the different breathing patterns which are seen in different physiological and pathological conditions. So as you can see in the slide, the first we shall briefly discuss about the respiration during sleep. Here during sleep, one of the basic factors happens in the body is that there is a reduction in the basic metabolic rate. So the whole systems in the body have slowed down, the sympathetic system, the parasympathetic system, except for the fact that the GI system is working actively during sleep and all other systems have slowed down. Similarly, so as with the other phenomena, other systems which is happening, so also in respiration, we see that during sleep, the respiration, the rate of the respiration and the depth of the respiration slows down during sleep. Next, we also find that there is certain change in the breathing patterns or the respiratory patterns during menstrual cycle. Now, during the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle, we find that there is a little hyperventilation. The rate of the breathing, the rate and the depth of the breathing is slightly increased during the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle. Next, another important clinical condition which we often encounter is the sleep apnea syndrome. Now, what do we mean by the sleep apnea syndrome? The word suggests apnea means sudden cessation of breathing. This sudden temporary cessation of breathing during sleep is called as sleep apnea syndrome. Now, to give you an example of what this sleep apnea syndrome is, you might have noticed many times, either you are traveling or in your house, that the person who is sleeping next to you, either while traveling, you will notice that they are snoring. So what is in fact snoring? Snoring is nothing but a respiratory cycle which is a forced one, and the person who is snoring has to take in air under force. This causes a sound which gives the word snoring, which leads to snoring. Now, when this becomes excessive, it is called as sleep apnea syndrome. And typically, if you would have heard, you will find that when a person is snoring or is suffering with sleep apnea syndrome, you will find that the intensity of the sound which he is making during snoring gradually increases, reaches a peak. After it reaches a peak, the person suddenly will stop breathing for some time and there will be no sound at all, followed by again a waxing and waning of the sound he makes. So what exactly is this? This is nothing but the typical presentation of a sleep apnea syndrome. Now, what happens during the sleep apnea syndrome is the muscles of inspiration, especially the genioglossus and the tongue, instead of remaining anteriorly, falls back. So when it falls back, what happens is it obstructs the respiratory passages. This obstruction of the respiratory passages blocks the free flow of air while breathing in or breathing out. So the person is made to take in breathe with a force using all the accessory muscles of inspiration, and thus as the air passes it creates a sound, and that is called as snoring. In fact, during that time, when the peak level of snoring has reached, you will find that the respiration stops for some time, and that is a temporary apnea. I will explain to you the mechanism what it is happening here. During this breathing in cycle, when a person is breathing in air with a forced inspiration, there is oxygen entering into the lungs. When the oxygen enters into the lungs, transfer of gases takes place and that oxygenation has occurred. This oxygenated blood is carried to the brain. In the brain, you will have the central respiratory mechanism or the central respiratory centers which are detecting this receiving of oxygen or the oxygenated blood, and thus the trigger for the inspiratory cycle temporarily stops for a minute. When this stops for a few seconds, then there is a sudden stopping of breathing. When there is a sudden stopping of breathing, what happens is there is no exchange of gases, there is no flow of air which is going out. When there is no flow of air which is being exhaled out of the lungs, buildup of carbon dioxide takes place. Now this buildup of carbon dioxide raises the carbon dioxide level. When the carbon dioxide level, the PCO2 level rises, this high PCO2 level is again detected by the respiratory center. This triggers the respiratory center or stimulates the respiratory center. The respiratory center then sends signals down to the muscles of inspiration. So the inspiration again starts. So there is a phase where there is a breathing occurring, then temporarily apnea, and then the phase of breathing starts. This is called as a sleep apnea syndrome. Now, the treatment for this sleep apnea syndrome, initially there were few trials done. If there is an obstruction in the nasal passages or in the glottis, some corrective surgeries have been done. In a few patients, they have responded. In some patients, they do not respond. Now, later on, of lately, a new test has been discovered which is known as a polysomnography. Now, what is this polysomnography? This polysomnography is a test which is to be done, which is a small computer device. It is fixed on to the person and overnight hospitalization is required. This will detect the respiratory cycles which are happening all over the night, and depending upon the number of episodes of apnea which you have, it detects whether the person is suffering with the sleep apnea syndrome or not. Now, once a person is diagnosed to have sleep apnea syndrome, then what is the next treatment? The treatment is high pressure oxygen has to be given. A small device is this device is given to the patient. He has to be on that device. This device supplies high pressure oxygen during his sleep, so that the temporary hypoxemia which occurs gets corrected. So this test is known as polysomnography. The machine which corrects this, or the device which is given for this correction, is known as a CPAP machine. Now, what are the clinical symptoms which you will find that the patient who is suffering with sleep apnea syndrome? That is, how do you diagnose? Normally, such patients who are having the sleep apnea syndrome will not have a refreshing sleep. The purpose of a good sleep is, good 8-hour sleep is that it should be a healthy sleep, undisturbed sleep with cycles of REM and NREM, more number of NREM sleeps, and more number of NREM sleep patterns. Since the person is active throughout, there is a difficulty in breathing, his respiratory muscles are active, he will not have a refreshing sleep, and in the morning when he gets up, he will not that active. A dullness will be present, morning headaches will be present, and in severe cases or in extreme cases of sleep apnea syndrome, the person, as soon as he gets up, immediately will go to sleep even in a sitting posture, even in a sitting position. So when you find that some patients who are complaining of that they do not feel fresh in the morning after getting up, having morning headaches and daytime sleepiness to the extent that while working they take few naps of sleep, such persons should be suspected to have a sleep apnea syndrome. This sleep apnea syndrome then to be diagnosed with polysomnography and certain treatment to be initiated. Next, there is another syndrome which is called as sudden infant death syndrome. Now, this sudden infant syndrome is also known as crib death, or is also known as a cot death. This state is quite often seen in children up till 6 months of age. As the word suggests, sudden infant death syndrome. The child is active, no complaints. The mother gives the feed, puts the baby on the cot or the crib, and after feeding and after giving a feed, suddenly the next day or after a few hours, mother finds that the child is not responding and dies. This is known as SIDS or sudden infant death syndrome. Commonly it is seen in premature infants. One of the possible cause for this is that there is a regurgitation of the feed which is going into the lungs, and there is an aspiration or asphyxia. This resulting in sudden hypoxia and death. To prevent the sudden cot death or crib death, one of the precautions which you as a physician should advise to the mother is that after giving every feed, the child should not be made to lie, should not be put in a supine position for at least 30 to 40 minutes. They should be, after every feed, they should be put in a semi-prone position or should be put up vertically straight, so that whatever feed is given, the stomach gets emptied. After the stomach is emptied, then you can put the child onto the cot. This is one of the precautions that should be taken to avoid sudden infant death syndrome. In most of the cases, the cause is not known, but a statistical correlation is that it is commonly seen in premature infants. Now, Cheyne-Stokes breathing. Now, what is this Cheyne-Stokes breathing? This Cheyne-Stokes breathing is also known as a periodic breathing. To see this graph, you will find that there is a straight horizontal line, followed by certain respiratory excursions. These excursion waves are following a typical pattern. You will find that there is a slow increase in the rate and the depth of respiration. The breathing reaches a peak. After it reaches the peak, there is a sudden slowdown or a fall in the respiratory rate, and there is a decrease in the depth of respiration, and finally it reaches zero and there is again sudden temporary cessation of breathing. There is a period of apnea. After this brief period of apnea, again the respiratory cycle starts. The normal respiratory cycle doesn't come back. There is a gradual increase in the rate of respiration, and you will find that there is a gradual increase in the depth of the respiration. You will find that in the initial first two graphs after apnea, there is a little gap between the two respiratory cycles. As with each peak, you will find that the gap is reducing. That means the respiratory cycles are occurring more frequently and the depth is increasing, followed by again a cessation of breathing. Now this cycle goes on and off, where you will have a phase of apnea for a few seconds, then increase in the respiratory rate, increase in the depth of respiration, gradual decrease in the respiratory rate and the depth of respiration, followed by a period of apnea. This process goes on and on, hence it is known as a periodic breathing. It is also known as Cheyne-Stokes breathing. Now, how do you explain to this and what it happens? To understand this phenomena of periodic breathing, I will basically discuss a few sentences on the respiratory regulation, chemical regulation of respiration. We know that during inspiration, exchange of gases takes place, the blood becomes oxygenated, the PO2 level increases. Once the PO2 level increases, this oxygenated blood is carried by the circulatory system into the tissues, where oxygen is delivered into the tissues, carbon dioxide enters into the blood. The carbon dioxide level, as it enters into the venous blood, the PCO2 of the venous blood increases. This carboxylated blood reaches the lungs and exhaled. Ultimately, it is exhaled out. There are two factors which you have to understand here. One, this whole exchange of gases or transfer of gases is taking place at the alveolar level or at the lung level. The control of respiration, that is the neural control of respiration, is in the pons and the medulla. The pons and the medulla, that is the respiratory centers, will detect the changes in the blood gases levels and then send signals down through the descending tracts to the respiratory muscles to increase or decrease the rate of respiration. So there are two factors which are play. One, the control mechanisms which are at the level of the pons or the midbrain and the midbrain, medulla and the pons, and the actual event or the exchange of gases is taking place at the alveolar level or at the lung level. We also know that there is a circulation time. Circulation time is the time taken for the blood to reach from the lungs to the different areas of the body. So there is a circulation time where the time taken for the blood to reach from the alveoli to the brain, that is the circulatory system, let us say around 2 to 3 seconds. That is the cerebral circulation time. With this in background, we come on to the graph and we will begin our discussion of this periodic breathing from the apnea. Let's say the cycle begins at apnea. There is no breathing taking place, no exchange of gases taking place. When there is no exchange of gases taking place, there is no oxygen entering into the lungs, but the tissues are going on releasing the carbon dioxide from the cells into the blood. As a result of this apnea, the PCO2 levels is rising. Now this increased PCO2 level in the venous blood is carried through the circulatory system, and from there, as it passes to the circulation, it also passes through the respiratory system, that is the cerebral circulation. Now when this blood with the increased PCO2 levels reaches the respiratory center, the respiratory centers will detect that there is an increased carbon dioxide in the blood. That is, they will detect the PCO2 level is raised. Immediately, the respiratory centers will get activated or will send signals down into the respiratory muscles so that the rate and the depth of respiration is increased. When the rate and the depth of respiration is increased, the person begins to hyperventilate. Now you have a situation where the person is hyperventilating. Because of this hyperventilation, that means there is an increase in the rate of breathing. So the person is breathing more number of times, as a result of which he is exhaling more amount of oxygen out into the atmosphere, and consequently the PO2 levels in the blood falls. When this PO2 levels fall down, it results in a hypoxemic condition or hypoxemia. Now this hypoxemic blood is carried all throughout the body, so it passes through the circulatory system. The circulatory system now sends signals to the brain respiratory center, where the respiratory center detects that there is a decreased oxygenation of blood. Immediately, the respiratory centers send negative signals down, as a result of which the breathing stops or slows down. So you will find the second half of this graph that the rate of respiration is falling, the depth is falling. So now with the cessation of breathing or the respiratory muscles slowing down, the breathing rate slows down, as a result of which there is no exchange of gases taking place. The oxygen level builds up simultaneously, the carbon dioxide level also. Now the fallen PO2 levels because of this increases and is brought back to normal. This causes again the respiratory cycle to go back into apnea, and again there is a period of apnea and hyperventilation takes place. So it is basically the alterations in the PCO2 levels and the PO2 levels which is causing this alternation in the apnea and the hyperventilation, and it is known as Cheyne-Stokes breathing or periodic breathing. The next question comes is, where do you find that these conditions happen? There are two different physiological, pathophysiological conditions where you will find that this periodic breathing happens. One, when the person is in congestive cardiac failure. The second condition is directly head injury. I'll explain to you how this happens in both the situations. Let us discuss the scenario 1, a congestive cardiac failure. In congestive cardiac failure, there is a failure of the heart muscle. The heart is failing to pump adequate blood into the system. As a result of this failing heart, the force of contraction is reduced. When the force of contraction is reduced, the circulation time is increased. That is, the force with which the heart is pumping the blood gets reduced. When this gets reduced, it takes a little longer time for the blood to reach the tissues. When it takes a long time to reach the tissues from the different areas of the body to the different areas of the body, that means the time taken, the time available for the tissues to deliver oxygen to deliver carbon dioxide is also increased. So because of the sluggishness of the heart, because of the slow pumping of the heart, because of which there is a slow velocity of the blood, there is an increase in the PCO2 levels. This increased PCO2 levels again will stimulate the respiratory center. The respiratory center will detect that there is an increase in the PCO2 levels. It will stimulate the respiratory centers. The respiratory centers will get stimulated, as a result of which there will be increase in the rate of breathing. So this excess carbon dioxide will be washed out from the body. But when this excess carbon dioxide washing off is taking place, simultaneously there is a hypoxemia also taking place. Now when this hypoxia takes place, there is again in the fall in the PO2 levels. Now because of the circulatory system is slow to move, the brain respiratory centers detect that there is a hypoxia. Because to correct this hypoxia, again the respiratory centers get stimulated and there is an increase in the rate and the depth of respiration. So you will find that here, because of the slowness of the circulatory system and there is a time gap between the lungs and the brain responding to the PO2 changes and the PCO2 changes, you will find that there is an alteration taking place. There is alteration in the apnea and the hyperventilation. This is the cause of the periodic breathing in congestive cardiac failure. Similarly, you will find that this periodic breathing also takes place in head injuries, when patient suffers from head injuries or any tumors of the brain where there is an increase in the intracranial tension. Imagine there is a head injury, there is an intravascular hematoma, there is a cerebral hemorrhage taking place or a hematoma happening, that compressing the blood vessel, there is an increase in the intracranial pressure. Normally, for circulation to happen in the brain, that is cerebral circulation to take place, the pressure within the cerebral circulation should be more than the intracranial tension. Now, if the ICT or the intracranial tension increases, it compresses the free flow of blood in the cerebrum, that is cerebral circulation is reduced. When there is a reduced cerebral circulation, this cuts off the supply of the blood to the respiratory centers, and this cutting off the blood supply to the respiratory centers will stimulate the respiratory centers to increase the rate and the depth of respiration. When the rate and the depth of respiration is restored, the CO2 is restored, the cerebral circulation pressure comes over the ICT. When the cerebral circulation pressure is more than the ICT, the excess drive of the respiratory center to stimulate the respiration is lost because the normalcy is restored. When that excess drive is lost, again the CVP pressure, that is cerebrovascular pressure, falls down and the intracranial pressure increases. Again that stimulates the respiratory center to increase the respiratory rate. So this cycle, where there is a periodic pattern of apnea and hyperventilation, continues because of the alteration of the pressure in the intracranial tension and the cerebral pressure. So these are the two examples of the periodic breathing or Cheyne-Stokes breathing. Here I have explained to you in the diagram, where you can see that there is an apnea, followed of this apnea is followed by increase in the rate and the depth of breathing, followed by a gradual slowdown in the rate and the depth of the breathing, and followed by a sudden cessation of breathing for a few seconds. There, if you correlate the graph, you will find that the red line says that the increase and the decrease of the PCO2 levels in the blood compared with that of the neurons. If you see the two cycles, that is the red and the blue cycles, you will find that there is a time gap. One is the PCO2 of the cerebral circulation, the other is the PCO2 at the lung level. Since both of them are having a little difference in the time, that difference in the time gap gives a different responses or a differential response, as a result of which you would find that there is a periodic breathing happening between the apnea and the hyperpnea. Same thing, the periodic breathing which I have discussed with you earlier. Now let us come on to some of the terms which is known as eupnea. What is eupnea? Eupnea is defined as a normal breathing. The normal breathing can be either thoracic or it can be diaphragmatic. Then hyperpnea. What is hyperpnea? Hyperpnea is nothing but increase in the depth of respiration. The causes of hyperpnea could be voluntary. You can voluntarily hyperventilate yourself for a few seconds, after which it is not possible. You need to stop and there will be a period of sudden slowdown of breathing. The other reasons could be stimulations from the cerebral cortex, or it can be reflexly a hyperpnea. You can find that there is an increase in the BMR happening, as in thyroid toxicosis. When there is an increased blood cell metabolic rate, the depth of respiration is increased, and it can be also psychogenic. What are the features of what are the features which you see in hyperpnea? Temporarily, after the end of the hyperpnea, you will find a brief apnea happening because there is a sudden increase in the depth of respiration which is happening, increase in the depth of the respiration. You find that there is a washout happening, so there is apnea. Carbon dioxide washout happening, so there is an alkalosis. Alkaline urine can also be seen. You will have ketosis, that is presence of ketone bodies in the urine. There is a peripheral vasoconstriction happening, as a result of which the peripheral skin becomes cold, the blood pressure is increased, the cardiac output is increased, and if the hyperpnea continues for some time, you will find that there is a dyspnea, paresthesia, and tetany. There are two causes of tetany. One of the common cause of tetany could be calcium deficiency, hypocalcemia. The other cause could be hyperpnea. What is tachypnea? The word tachy means always increased. An increase in the rate of respiration is called as tachypnea. Apnea is sudden temporary cessation of breathing. It could be voluntary, where you can have a voluntary apnea for a few seconds, maximum 20 to 30 seconds. Apnea is also seen in periodic breathing. Apnea can also occur after a bout of hyperpnea. There is a reflex apnea happening, where this reflex apnea or a deglutition apnea happening. When you swallow, there is a sudden brief temporary halt in respiration, that is known as reflex apnea or a deglutition apnea. Dyspnea is distressed breathing, difficulty in breathing. It is also called as conscious breathing. Normally, under normal conditions, you are not aware of your respiratory cycles. But if you become aware or conscious of the fact that you are taking in air or inhaling or exhaling, then that is called as dyspnea. It is difficulty in breathing. Physiologically, dyspnea can be because of the stimulation of centers. It is also seen in Herring-Weir reflex. Muscular exercise, when it is beyond a limit, when you do severe exercises, you will become dyspneic, increased BMR, or a decrease in the vital capacity. Pathologically, where do you see dyspnea? Three basic conditions: alterations in the chemical composition, excess work of respiratory muscles, or psychogenic dyspnea. Commonly you will find this dyspnea where there is a difficulty in exchange of gases taking place. This exchange of gases can be seen in patients who are suffering with COPD or bronchial asthma, where there is a difficulty or improper transfer of gases taking place. This results in alteration in the PO2 levels, which results in dyspnea. Orthopnea. Orthopnea is whenever you find that on lying down there is a dyspnea, it is known as orthopnea. Asphyxia. Asphyxia is characterized by a chain of symptoms due to defective aeration of the blood. The causes of this asphyxia could be strangulation, drowning, or it is an end-stage disease. Where do you see this asphyxia? Asphyxia is seen basically when there are two conditions happening. One, there should be an oxygen lack, or there should be a carbon dioxide excess. What are the stages of asphyxia? There are three stages of asphyxia. One, stages of hypernia, which last for around 1 to 2 seconds. Then is the stage of convulsion. This is again lasting for 1 to 2 seconds. And the third is the stage of exhaustion, or the end stage, which lasts for around 2 seconds. So total is 4 to 5 seconds. In the first stage of hypernia, suppose there is a strangulation happening or somebody is throttling your neck, you will find that this is the stage 1 of the hypernia, where you will find that there is an increase in the respiratory effort taking place, a deep breathing you take, and the rate of respiration is also increased. This lasts for 1 to 2 seconds. If the strangulation is removed, the hypernia gets corrected and you're all back to normal. If during that first 2 seconds, if the strangulation or the obstruction to the respiratory tract is not removed, then you go into the stage of convulsion. This stage of convulsion is lasting for 2 to 4 seconds, where again the same thing prevalence. There is a decreased oxygenation happening, the air entry is not there, there is no oxygen in the alveoli, no transfer of gases taking place. So there is a severe hypoxemia. The amount of hypoxia in the stage 2 is comparatively more or increased than the stage 1. The person goes further into deterioration. There is a very strong sympathetic stimulation taking place. The blood pressure is increased, the pulse rate is increased. You will find then there is a excess salivation taking place, vomiting may happen, defecation can take place, and ultimately the person goes into a stage of convulsions. In the stage 3, even still, if the obstruction is not removed at this stage, the stage of convulsion, there is a stage of exhaustion where you will find that all the parameters going down, the heart rate slows down, the respiratory rate slows down, the blood pressure starts falling, and ultimately death happens at the third. This also you will find not only on strangulation, suddenly some foreign body getting stuck in the trachea. What is cyanosis? Cyanosis is defined as the bluish discoloration of the skin. Typically, there are two types of cyanosis. One is the central cyanosis and the other is the peripheral cyanosis. Physiological causes, you will find that the peripheral cyanosis is sometimes seen in fingers, in your fingertips, where they suddenly turn blue, the nail beds are getting blue. This may be because of excessive cold, or you put your hands in cold water. There is a strong vasoconstriction going on, as a result of which there is a little bluish discoloration at the nail bed or the finger pulps, and that one of the cause could be local chilling, or it could be a BMR alteration. Pathologically, you will find that cyanosis is also seen in hypoxic hypoxia, in stagnant hypoxia, where there is a slowish circulation. Because of the slowing circulation, there is no exchange of gases taking place. The reduced hemoglobin or the deoxygenated hemoglobin increases in content, as a result of which giving a bluish discoloration causing cyanosis. Then increased amount of methemoglobin or sulfhemoglobinemia also causes cyanosis. It's also seen in polycythemia. Polycythemia is the condition where there is a increase in the RBC count more than 7 million. Thank you, one and all. Very well.